the first story, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really interested to get your opinion about this one. So, as you know, we are about what, 2.5 weeks away from the presidential election for 2024. I have told you on this show a couple of times, we've been going through the numbers. And when you compare Kamala Harris's campaign to her predecessors, she is behind in key demographic groups, whether it's Black voters, Latino voters, the Arab American voters, Muslim voters as well. She's also behind with men, but you kind of like expect that given the outcome of the economy. I told you before, for a lot of male voters, they're saying the number one issue with them is the economy. And then if you look at the responses from female voters, it tends to be more geared towards the overturn of Roe v. Wade, at least those that vote Democrat. So we are seeing a little bit of a split there. But even when compared to Hillary Clinton, you can see her number right now is lower. So corporate media has finally got to the freak out mode. And we're going to start with this clip here from CNN with Dana Bash, where she is sounding the alarm about Kamala Harris having this trouble here with Black and Latino voters. Let's start with those groups first, and then we'll get to the Arab American and Muslim voters. Let's go ahead and dive right in.
There are a number of key groups in the Democratic coalition, I don't need to tell you, who are not supporting Kamala Harris in the same numbers that they did for Joe Biden, who obviously beat Donald Trump. Black voters, Latino voters, especially the men in those groups. Where do you...
Pause. We're just go ahead and pause right there, because I do want you to get a chance to look at the numbers before we, she continues on with this conversation. So you can see it for yourself, folks, here. You can see when it comes to Kamala Harris, comparing her to Joe Biden. And we showed the comparisons with Hillary Clinton and with Barack Obama as well. You can see that it's obvious that she is behind when it comes to Black voters at this point in time. She has plus 63. Biden had plus 75. When it comes to Black male voters in particular, she has plus 53. He has plus 60. When it comes to all Latino/Hispanic voters, Kamala Harris has plus 18. Joe Biden has plus 30, had plus 33. And when it comes to Latino/Hispanic male voters, she has plus 3 and Biden has plus 23. So one thing I do want to add here really quickly before we move on with the video, and I've told you guys this before, I would argue that if Joe Biden were still in this race at this point in time, I don't think that he would be able to obtain the numbers that he had in 2020 either. I do think that his numbers would be low. In fact, we saw signs of that before he dropped out of the race. We saw that he was starting to, decline with certain particular demographic groups. So I will say that, and a lot of that just has to do with the Biden-Harris administration, the economy, the foreign policy decisions. We have multiple conflicts happening right now, whether it's Gaza and Israel and Lebanon and Iran and, of course, Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of pieces to this. So I do want to put that out there, because some people are like, Sabby, you're too hard on Kamala. I'm like, whatever. But people are like, well, you're not saying those things about Biden. And I was saying those things about Biden when he was still in the race. But the reality is, I think if he were still in this race today, I think his numbers would not hold up to the numbers that he had in 2020. So I do want to be clear about that. Let's go ahead and continue with the video.
I think you can make up for what we're seeing in the deficits in the polls.
Well, first of all, Dana, no election is exactly like the one previous, right? And so I'd say the biggest thing demographically happened in this election, which it's curious to me it doesn't get more attention than it does, is Donald Trump is facing historic gender gap with women. And if you look at young women, he may end up losing them by 40, 45 points. And those younger women turn out at higher rates than younger men. So we have some real strength on our side. Obviously, Kamala Harris has spoke to this, and I think this is the right approach. It's certainly been her approach, and her dictate to us is we're going to treat every cohort as if they are a swing voter universe. Whether those be Black men, Black women, Latino women. So the way I think about it, we're focused on 7 states. Do I think we can reach our numbers with the voter cohort you just mentioned, consistent with our strengths in other part of the electorate, to get a win number and get to 270 electoral votes. I do. Another thing I think particularly important with Latino voters is in Florida, Donald Trump's going to win Latino voters. Florida's a big state. So any national poll, and I generally think national polls are completely irrelevant as you look at the presidential race. But let
me pause here for a second and chime in about Latino voters, if I may. I don't know why the Democratic Party seems to assume this, that if you're Latino, then you're automatically going to support the Democratic Party. That's not necessarily the case. They tend to be split down the middle. Remember, there are some Latino Americans that are more conservative. If you look at, like he mentioned, Florida, for example, like Cuban Americans tend to be a little bit more conservative, but also other Latino Americans as well can tend to be a little bit more conservative. So this idea that just because a particular demographic is a group of color, that they would automatically support the Democratic Party. I don't understand why the Democratic Party hasn't figured this out. That's not necessarily the case. And then there are some, Latino American voters that when you look at some of the social issues, they are going to be more conservative, right? Like when it comes to abortion, they might be more conservative. They may be against any type of policy that they feel is leaning towards socialism, depending on which country they came from. These are important things I think that needs to be mentioned, but that just shows you something about the Democratic Party, that they think that because you are a group of color, that you're most likely going to support them. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, if you look at some of the Latin American countries, if you look at some of the Latin American countries, particularly in like South America, for example, it's not uncommon for them to be more conservative when it comes to the social issues, but they may be a little bit more populist when it comes to those core economic issues. So I think, again, just a weird assumption by the Democratic Party.
We're focused on what is our Latino number in Arizona, in Nevada, with the Puerto Rican community throughout Pennsylvania. Philadelphia has the second highest population of Puerto Rican voters in the continental U.S. after New York. So in those states, but we're going to fight for every vote, whether that's, with our television ads, the candidate's schedule, the media she's doing, but very importantly, the ground game. I think door knocking is going to be more important in this presidential race than anyone I can remember in recent memory. And I think we've got the organization to be out there because there's still voters at this late date, as much as you and I have focused on this race, who are just beginning to check in. And to have somebody from their neighborhood come and listen to them and have a conversation with them is incredibly important.
Interesting there. He did sound a little bit nervous. Could just be because he was on, I don't know, corporate media. I don't know. But he did seem a little bit nervous there, a little bit unsure. I also get a little bit cringe when they say things like, there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in Philadelphia, like things like that. I'm just like, oh, so now you care about the Puerto Ricans in Philadelphia? Really interesting there. Now, that was one clip, but there's another one that I want to show you. And this one involves Arab American voters, where they have a little bit of a roundtable discussion here that they are not willing to support Kamala Harris. And this by far, I think, is going to be Kamala Harris's biggest hurdle, right? Like the Arab American voters, the Muslim voters, because that group, those two groups in particular, did help Joe Biden in states like Michigan, in states like Wisconsin, in states like Pennsylvania, those blue wall states. And she is not polling well with those groups because of the genocide in Gaza, which I think we all pretty much predicted would happen. And she has not changed her rhetoric around that. So let's get into this roundtable here again. I think it's very telling. You can see how corporate media is starting to respond. They're like, uh-oh, we're getting closer to Election Day, and these things have not changed.
With just 18 days until Election Day and the conflict in the Middle East growing, the crisis in the region could determine how many Arab Americans will cast their ballot in the race for the White House. NBC's Yasmin Vasugian sat down with a group of Lebanese American voters to get their thoughts. She joins us this morning. Amiga, it's great seeing you. What did you learn from these voters?
This is my third time in Dearborn throughout this election season, throughout this year, Jose. And these group of voters, they feel forgotten. They feel as if the only time their vote matters is every 4 years when there isn't, in fact, an election. But in the interim period, they are not heard. And they feel as if the war, both in Gaza and now spilling out into Lebanon, is representative of the fact that their vote doesn't necessarily matter. Let's take a listen to more of what they had to say, Jose, and then we'll talk on the other side.
How are you feeling 2.5 weeks out from this election?
Betrayed, second-class citizens. We've been dehumanized. We're, I don't even know if I can use second class. I feel like we're almost third or fourth class citizens now.
This is what we're trying to grapple with as a community of color, as a community that is civically engaged, and a community that's done everything right here in America, right? But we've been told that you don't matter, to the extent that we will continue to shed the blood of your people.
Let's pause there for just a second. He said we've done everything right. Now, I'm going back to after September 11, and I remember there was a lot of Islamophobia in this country, not just from everyday people, but also politicians. And I don't know how old everyone is that is watching, but if you remember during that time, there was a lot of Islamophobia. And I feel like it took years for this country to kind of move, past that. And some people still hold those beliefs. Some people still believe that all Muslim people or all Arab Americans are terrorists. And it's really disturbing because that's not the case. But the thing that really got me is when he said we feel dehumanized. And they should. And I was sitting here and I was thinking to myself, I think they are seeing, or maybe they are, I hope that, they're seeing that this is how some of us that are Black Americans have been feeling for a long time. Unseen, dehumanized, ignored, not just by the Democratic Party, but by all of these political parties in particular. And it just goes to show you what I've said before over and over again. There is a certain dominant force and agenda in this country. And it's like, no matter how well you do, because he was like, we do everything we're supposed to do. No matter how well you do or how well you do it, you will always be seen as less than. And you can tell that from the rhetoric that you hear from Kamala, from Trump. You can tell it. Notice how both of them put Israel first. It's all about what Israel has the right to do. It's all about, like, how can we help Israel? How can we help the Israelis? And the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, they're always mentioned as an afterthought. It's like that little add-on at the end of a speech to say, oh yeah, and about those people too. And it's really sad. It's unnerving. But I will say this as well. You really cannot go to Arab Americans or Muslim Americans right now and tell them that they have to vote for Kamala Harris. You really can't. You can't go to these people who have lost family members in the Middle East, who continue to lose family members in the Middle East. I want to remind you that Gaza, they have cut off communications in northern Gaza again. So you know what's coming. You cannot expect these people to just swallow a genocide and say, okay, I'm going to go vote for you because they keep saying you're the lesser of two evils. You cannot. And I will tell you another thing. If you are trying to shame those people for not supporting someone who is a part of the current administration that is funding and aiding the genocide, if you're trying to shame those people into doing that, you're just going to push them completely away from the Democratic Party. And that's what I've heard from some of them that I've spoken to personally. They don't want anything to do with this party, regardless if leadership changes. They don't want anything to do with it in the future. But you can't shame these people. You really can't. So let's get to the Lebanese American part here.
As Arab Americans in this community, as Lebanese Americans now in this community, and you say politicians, which politicians do you blame?
They're the ones that are approving the weapons, the resources to bomb our people back home. Although I'm here, I'm an American, I work here, I've had my kids here, my roots are still in Lebanon. I feel like they're turning their back on us. That's my home, my homeland. And they're the ones that are bombing it.
200,000 voters, Jose, Arab American voters in the state of Michigan are at stake. And as we know, it is integral to the election to win that state for both of these candidates. And so they are really kind of vying for these votes. The three individuals that we heard from are likely voting for Jill Stein, a third-party candidate. And I pressed them saying, there are many people that will argue and say a vote for Jill Stein in the state of Michigan is, in fact, a vote for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said repeatedly he will reinstate the Muslim ban. He has said he wants Netanyahu to, quote unquote, finish the job. They say a vote for Jill Stein for the third party is, in fact, a protest vote. And they say that because essentially they want to change the system, that they over and over have been forced to choose the lesser of two evils. And they're done doing that, especially because they feel as if their vote has been taken for granted. And they feel as if they do this protest vote, vote third party, vote for Jill Stein, instead of, for instance, for Kamala Harris, as historically the Arab American community has voted for, the Democratic candidate. In fact, maybe that will force the system to further bolster a third party candidate. And that is what they, Jose, are voting for in light of being one issue voters. They're voting because of the ongoing war in the Middle East.
Yasmin Osugian, thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
So let's talk about this for just a second, because the reality is, I mean, and people, you know, some people will stay home. It is what it is. But that talking point doesn't work with them. The talking point of supporting Jill Stein is a vote for Donald Trump. They don't want to hear that they're not thinking, they're just like, whatever. Because the thing is, like, again, you can't undo a genocide. You can't. So it's mind blowing to me that people would still make this argument to Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, would make this argument to them that, well, you're not supporting Kamala, you're supporting Jill Stein. That's going to be a vote for Donald Trump. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but the majority of people that support third party candidates would not support the Democrat or the Republican candidate. Some of them probably would, yes, but the majority would not. And so you going to a group of people that has lost family lines and is still continuing to lose their people to a genocidal apartheid state, and you're telling them, well, if you support Jill Stein, you're going to get Donald Trump. How can you say that to someone who is losing entire family lines? How can you say that? As if you totally just dismissed everything that they said to you during that conversation. That is the thing that like drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. And at the end of the day, like I told you guys, when you go in the voting booth, I'm not going to be with you. You are not going to be with me. Okay. But the reality is, shaming these people for not supporting the current administration that is aiding and funding the genocide, that is a big no. You just cannot. You just, I don't know how else to say this to people. I don't know how else to say it. And even here, Zen and Zipline, Republicans support Stein. Okay. We can argue about that however you want to, but Republicans support Kamala Harris. See, this is why this talking point doesn't even work. And it's just all over the place. Kamala Harris is on the stage with Liz Cheney. Kamala Harris is getting endorsements from Dick Cheney. Republicans are supporting Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris wants a Republican in her cabinet. So you see, this is why you guys can't do this whole lesser two evil thing anymore. You can't say, oh, the Republicans are so much worse. Because if they're so much worse, then why is your so-called lesser of two evil willing to work with so much worse? The Democratic Party has to have some like deep reflections to do about where they want to go and what they want to do. Because even in this clip here, you're going to see it, a big stern warning to Abby Phillips at CNN about what is happening with Arab American voters. And people need to hear this because they don't care. And I've said it before because I've interviewed a number on the show. At this point, there is a certain segment of the Arab American and Muslim American population that does not care if Donald Trump wins at this point. Listen to this.
There is a segment of the Democratic coalition that wants to see actually a change in the rhetoric. They want to see her move in a particular direction. Has she done enough?
I don't think so. And I've been talking to people in the business sector in the Arab American community, and I was really surprised this week to get an earful to hear them say that they would much rather either vote a third party, not vote at all, or vote for Donald Trump. And I'm telling you, it's not obviously a significant sample size, but I cannot find one Arab American within my social circle in business or personally who have said that they will vote for Kamala Harris. When you look at the polling, it seems sort of neck and neck. What they are saying, and this is not a Donald Trump campaign line, that Tiffany Trump's father-in-law, who's a Lebanese businessman, has been successful in kind of converting and talking to people to explain why Trump would be better, even with the Muslim ban, even with everything else that has happened. They feel they do not have any political clout. They don't have any political operation. The only political power they have is their vote, even if it means the rise of Donald Trump.
So everybody hear what she just said there. I think that's very important. She said she can't find one Arab American that is willing to support Kamala Harris. I mean, when you have a group of people that have been screaming at the top of their lungs since October 7th, they've been screaming and saying, stop giving the arms to Israel, ceasefire now. And then you expect these people to just support the administration that is killing their people. What the hell is wrong with you? There is something seriously wrong with you. Seriously wrong. I mean, at this point, what you should be asking yourself is, are they trying to lose? Because that's almost what it feels like. It almost feels like Kamala Harris is trying to lose. We can have discussions about that at some point as well. Let me let her finish here.
Extraordinary. That's extraordinary. I mean, and that part, I mean, we were hearing about the inroads that Tiffany Trump's husband was making in the spring when the uncommitted, uninstructed movement in a couple of states in Wisconsin and Michigan were such a big deal. I mean, 48,000 votes for uninstructed in Wisconsin. That's more than twice Joe Biden's margin in 2020. In Michigan, 101,000 uncommitted votes. That's just shy of what Joe Biden won that state by. I mean, this is important and it could be decisive.
And there's 200,000 Muslims in Georgia that no one talks about, too. And in the CARE poll, which came out several months ago, Kamala Harris was in third place among Muslims in several of those states behind both Donald Trump and Jill Stein. So there is this position that she's in. But she also said...
Let me reframe this the way that, because I don't like the way he framed that. When he says Kamala Harris was in third place, let me reframe that and say Jill Stein is in first place. Lead with listen, let's switch it around, because you know why I want to frame it that way? Because when it comes to those swing states and it comes to the Muslim vote and the Arab American vote, what that shows you is that Kamala Harris is the spoiler. What? What is that you say, Sabby? Kamala Harris is a spoiler? Oh, hell no. Yes. When you look at the numbers in the swing states with those particular demographics, Kamala Harris is the spoiler, not Jill Stein. If Jill Stein has 40% of the Muslim vote in Michigan and Kamala Harris, I think she's at 12%, 12 or 13, 12 or 13. And I think Trump is ahead of Kamala, even in Michigan, if I remember correctly. And she has 40% of the Muslim vote in Michigan. That means that Kamala Harris is the spoiler, fam. I don't know how else to frame it. We looking at numbers here. So the same way the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they want to look at numbers. Well, more so the Democrats, because they're the ones kicking them off the ballot. The same way the Democratic Party wants to look at the numbers and say, oh, we go by the Electoral College and you can't win Electoral College. I want to look at numbers too. And I want to look at these numbers and look at the numbers of support from Muslim voters to show you that at this point in time, Kamala Harris is the spoiler. I don't know what else to tell you.
By the way, in clips, that they shouldn't go to Rafah. And she said that she would put something on the table against Bibi Netanyahu's government if they did go into Rafah. And now she's taking a big credit that they killed the terrorists in Rafah. It is a little bit of a flip-flop moment for her in a very fast time, considering how frequently she flip-flops.
We're talking about also what Joe Biden's position was. He was the one who created that red line about Rafah, which Israel completely ignored.
Exactly. They completely ignored it. So it's one thing to say that you should not do something, but I'm looking at your actions. So if I tell you, not to eat any more pizza, but I'm constantly feeding you pizza, am I really telling you not to eat any more pizza? So if you tell them, no, you should not go into Rafah, but you keep giving them the weapons, oh, you should try to do the best that you can to make sure that you don't kill any more civilians. Oh, by the way, stop starving those people in Gaza. By the way, you got to let some food come in or whatever. Stop doing that. You have to change the way that you're doing your military operation, etc. But I keep giving you the weapons and keep giving you the aid, and you come to Congress and I give you a pat on your back and people are standing up and clapping for you. Am I really telling you not to kill those people? Everything that Israel is doing right now, you have to be 100% to understand that this is what the U.S. government wants them to do. I had to go back and show you Biden's old website to show you what he had said about Palestinians when he was running in 2020. Israel is not doing anything the U.S. government doesn't want them to do.